give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Well, first of all, after our last episode, we have to ask, any more breakups?
No more breakups since the last conversation.
For me either, so
well,
we're doing
good.
Good.
That's good. Yes, thank you for helping me process all of that. I appreciate it, and I hope it was an interesting conversation for folks to listen to and maybe learn some things from. So,
yeah, and I hope they engage and let us know when there is some interest from what we're talking about, which is really fun, because what I'm hoping that we'll talk about this time is like how to build relationships. And one of the things and ways that we're planning of doing that is traveling together and creating some memories together. And so excited to be going to South Carolina again. I've been there before, and I'll do a little storytelling about that later on, but excited about going to South Carolina with you. And tell us what we're going to be doing, what you curated in the space.
Yeah, we are headed to Charleston to take the podcast on the road. We're going to Charleston, South Carolina, to record an episode. And the episode's going to drop the week of July 4th. And so it'll be a minute before our listeners and viewers get to see the actual episode. But we will be heading that way next week to record and to do some touristy stuff. I think you and I are gonna do a little do some tours, some Gullah Geechee tours, and I think we're gonna hit the International African American Museum, and I'm gonna take you to see the Angel Oak, which is an incredible experience to be under its canopy and think of all the things that it has seen. So. But so
I love that, because
I lived there for 22 years. I'm kind of curating. I'm putting together the list, and you're like, I'll just do whatever. I'm up for anything. So you schedule away. So
that is it. It is it, because I love traveling. I love having new experiences, and it'll be a different way of coming into experiencing the South and like Southern culture in the United States in particular. I've done the trip into South Carolina, and I actually got to go and visit Middleton Plantation, which was a particularly traumatizing experience for me. But South Carolina and the actual plantation was particularly beautiful. It was like so gorgeous, and like so dealing with being in this place that was so gorgeous, but then feeling the weight of the history and the trauma and the violence that happened. Both things happening at once was like a real intensity to my actual body. So I will be preparing for being in the South and being in that space again, because when I did it last time, I was like, I don't need to do this again. But I was with another Black woman who, has a really strong love of the South. So it's going to be wonderful to experience with you as a white identified person and having your roots and your history there. And with that, my thought is, what do you think is the significance of South Carolina in particular, as we're having this conversation about the 250th anniversary of the creation of the United States? Like, what's the richness that we're going to get out of that history that South Carolina provides to that history? I want to see. Well,
I mean, I think the reason that we picked Charleston to do this is because, this episode that we're going to be recording is going to air the week of July 4th, because it is the 250th anniversary of this country. And you and I were in dialogue about how could we talk about whether we give a fuck about the 250th anniversary and why. And as the dialogue was going, I was like, we should do this in Charleston, because, Charleston, South Carolina, for those who may be listening that are not on U.S. soil, and maybe you are and you don't know this, but Charleston was one of the ports for the transatlantic slave trade that saw over 40% of the kidnapped African humans who were brought over on the ships, landed at the port in Charleston. And so it is, I always called it a portal. I lived there for 22 years. I wasn't raised there, but I did live there for my, a significant portion of my adult life. My child was raised there. And I came into my awakening in that city for the horrific shooting at Mother Emanuel that took the 9 beautiful souls. So there's a lot of history there. There's a lot. There's a lot of reliance on the antebellum narrative that Charleston still makes a lot of money annually off of. They heavily lean into the antebellum.
And when you talk about antebellum, for people that are not familiar with the history of the United States, and we're talking about antebellum South, we're talking about Jim Crow laws, we're talking about a real separation between white folks and Black folks, and equity and equality and access to all kinds of resources that is like felt in a very real cultural way, particularly in South Carolina. That's what I was feeling. So I'm kind of like attributing that to that. And this is a really important conversation, as you're mentioning, about the slave trade and how many people went through the port in South Carolina, thinking about the fact that we just had this UN resolution, actually designating the slave trade, by the UN General Assembly, adopting a landmark resolution designating that the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. And 123 to 3 vote. We know that the United States, as we're having this conversation about, the 250th anniversary, not acknowledging reparations for this.
Right. We can't own our shit.
All of this is very important. It's going to be a really interesting conversation, especially as we're seeing the place where so much of the atrocity happened in South Carolina.
Well, in Charleston, for those that may not know, Charleston is where the Civil War began. So the very first shot that was fired that started the Civil War was in Charleston, was from Fort Sumter, and which is still there. And if you and I decide to do that, we could go take a tour of Fort Sumter.
We're gonna have to, because my stepfather was a Civil War historian. He
really
absolutely loved the Civil War. White Irish guy, this man. And he loved the history of the Civil War. So I'm definitely going to have to do that and force him out from my old home.
Yeah, we could take a boat out there. They have boat tours, and you take a boat out to the island and walk around. And so that's where the first shot was fired. And so Charleston, on so many levels, has got this blood in the soil of this space. And they don't, to my, the way I look at it, they don't do what they could do to try to tell the true narrative of what happened within their boundaries of their city. They tout and herald the houses that still look like they did when that first shot was fired down on the Battery. You've probably seen pictures of Charleston, of what they call Rainbow Row, which is a row of houses that are all these different colors. And so Charleston is known for its food. It's known for its hospitality. It's known for the cobblestone streets that you and I have talked about before. And those cobblestones were ballast stones that were on the slave ships. And so you're literally walking on the history of the transatlantic slave trade. But when you're walking around Charleston, you can totally miss that, because that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the charm and the hoop skirts and the mint juleps and the sitting on the porches of the Charleston homes and all of that stuff. That's what they talk about. That's what they revel in.
That is what they talk about, but you don't miss the history and the feeling of the slave trade when you're walking around in black skin. I can tell you that.
Right. Correct. Yes.
So
thank you for that distinction. Yes. The white people miss it, but
or other people who are not just aware, you know what I'm saying, of the history, but walking on a cobblestone street, seeing one of the human bolts that are on the side corner of somebody's building, seeing that they still have placards that say white only, in different places where they're showing things, or where a dog has an opportunity to drink from a water fountain, but black folks can't. You know, there are pieces that might not be elevated in the conversation amongst the people, but walking around, you feel it, it, it's there.
Yeah. Thank you for that correction, because you're right. It's the white people that don't necessarily see it if they don't have to. So we thought that this City would be the perfect place to have this conversation. And we're inviting friends, local folks to come and be in circle with us and talk about why do we give a fuck about the 250 years of this country. And it should be a really interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So
I'm excited to have the conversation. Also, who have you curated into the space? Just not like specific names, but just like kind of the people to have this conversation. I think would be fun to hear about.
yeah, I mean, I really wanted a voice. I really wanted voices from the Gullah Geechee community, which is the community of folks that you were asking me, are there any indigenous folks that we're inviting into the space? And maybe not indigenous in the Native American space, but indigenous in the Gullah Geechee space. And so Gullah Geechee is the community that was born in the Charleston area, but kind of up and down the coast. There's a certain, they call it the Gullah Geechee corridor, where the Africans that came over, that were kidnapped and brought over and enslaved, were often separated from their own tribesmen, from their own, so that they couldn't speak the same language with each other. They couldn't dialogue with each other. That was a tactic of the slavers to make sure that they couldn't, coalesce in coalition and rise up, and it just made it more difficult. And Gullah Geechee is a community, it's a culture, it's a language that was born out of all of these different African dialects and different cultures and traditions. It was a way for them to create community with each other, even if they had different traditions, different languages and dialects and things. And so I really wanted someone from the Gullah Geechee community, and I think we're going to maybe have more than one or two folks that might be able to speak into that community and how it still thrives today. And I want us, I'm going to book us an opportunity to go on a Gullah Geechee tour, because they tell the narrative that isn't told in the regular spaces, the regular tourist spaces of Charleston. So yeah, I'm really thinking about who can come to the circle and speak into their perspective about why a 250th anniversary of this country maybe matters or doesn't matter. I'm also going to try to curate some folks that might come in that would bring a different perspective, maybe more folks that look like me, and maybe see things through a lens that might be a little different. And so, but it's going to be in the round. We really want this to be a space where, very conversational. We want to hear from people's perspectives. We want to make sure that we minimize any harm that might happen or could happen, and just really be a safe space for people, and a brave space maybe for people to
because safety is relative, but an intentional space where we can come and have a conversation, I think, is a helpful way to think about it, and helpful way for our listeners to be thinking about it, or our watchers to be thinking about just folks' perspective about what 250th anniversary means. I know that I've been thinking about it since they've been talking about parties, and I know that there's a tremendous amount of people that are organizing around this conversation of celebration of like a history of a culture and of a powerhouse that is existing today, as we see how the United States is existing and being received by the rest of the world. And then this reality of a history of internal harm as it's been developing and trying to figure itself out, baby growing up, and realizing that there's so much that the founders of this place didn't consider about what it would look like for us to be really diversifying our populations and our communities and what humanity looks like living together. And that brings me back to being able to acknowledge when there is harm in this conversation about, the United States not choosing to support reparations for the Atlantic slave trade, and what that looks like when we go into South Carolina and talk to the people that have a history of their family and cultural relationship existing under the reality of what the U.S. is still maintaining today. And this kind of lack of acknowledgement of like Black community, like Black bodies, Black experience, Black history. And we are such an integral part of the 250th anniversary of this of these United States, and because so much contribution has come from the Black community specifically. I don't always like to talk about food and dancing and music, but the reality of the situation is a lot of things that are integral to American culture does come out of the Black community, finding different ways to be able to survive, finding different ways to be able to bring joy and to not only our own communities, but to other people that can enjoy the artistry of our work. And one of the places that you have identified for us to do some of our conversation out of is the Jenkins. I don't want to get the name messed up.
I know. It's the Jenkins Youth and Family Village is where we're going to be recording the episode. And I'm
Let's
so
talk
excited
about the joy that's coming out of that. And we're both smiling because we did our background research and was looking at what's happening at the Jenkins Orphanage. And it has a really deep history, United States history that we should be excited about celebrating as we're talking about 250th. These are the types of things that are wonderful, in my opinion, to be considering to celebrate. So you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. So it was called the Jenkins Orphanage. That was its name for, I'm not sure exactly when they changed the name. It's now called the Jenkins Youth and Family Village. But if you go on the website, and we'll put the link to the website in the notes, so that you can go and look at it yourself. I don't know. Did you want me to share the screen so that we can look a little bit, see a picture?
You can share the screen, but we want to talk about how fun the storytelling about how this family center came about. A gentleman ran into some young boys on a train car, an empty train car, and wondered, how it is that their parents left them. And these young people said that they didn't have any parents, that they were abandoned. And so him and his high yellow wife, and I say it that way in particular.
You can say that. I'm not going to say that, but it's in the bio.
So the high yellow wife. And I say that because, in the history of the United States, it was important to acknowledge that a browner skinned person marrying somebody who was lighter skinned helped to elevate them within the social structure, because they were closer to whiteness, or they were participating in a relationship that was closer to whiteness, which would allow this man at the time, I imagine, to be able to build the support that he was able to build from the orphanage. So he started in his home with very meager resources, but because he was taking care of these young people and because there was a great need, he was able to use mutual aid and community resources to build out and get support to build this wonderful orphanage. And some of the things that he focused on, keeping these young people in line. One, the main building that they were able to get was really next to a police precinct. And so that was one of the ways that Mr. Jenkins was able to keep the young people in line, by reminding them that that's not the path that they want to go down. But then the other beautiful thing was showing and presenting to them and giving them the gift of music, which they took on and helped to sustain them. So I'm going to pass it back over to you. I was giving you time to get ready for things to show.
Well, we have a couple of things to share. So, the Jenkins Orphanage, that he came across these boys in the rail car in 1891. So this was, in Charleston in 1891, Jim Crow South, right? And he and his wife took these boys in, and they founded the orphanage. And I'm just going to share real quick, or put on the stage here, because I wanted everybody to see his face. So this is the Reverend Daniel Joseph Jenkins, and he. He's got such a great, I love that there's a picture of him, and I love that we can see his face, and just imagine, him taking these boys into his home, he and his wife. And if you go to the website, there's a lot of storytelling about what the history was, and how they took these boys in, and how they decided that there was a need. And I think within 2 years, that they had, and they have all kinds of pictures of the kids, but within 2 years, I think it says they had 500 children in their care within 2 years. So if you think about timing wise, and you think about Jim Crow South and what was happening, one of the things that you identified, Jay, when we were reading this history, because they don't necessarily speak to why they thought all of these children were considered orphans and were abandoned, but
where the parents go?
Huh?
Mhm. Where the parents go? That's the question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And one of the things that you were saying was Jim Crow South, they were being lynched. And
Mhm.
so in 2 years, they had 500 children in their care, which is just incredible. This is a picture of the original orphanage that you're seeing on your screen here. And it was located on Franklin Street in Charleston. It was right next to the city jail. And so to your point, you said that it says in the history in the copy that that Reverend Jenkins felt that while the residents of the jail were very noisy, it was actually a great way for the students, the children, to realize that they needed to keep it on the straight and narrow for their path, that they wouldn't end up in that city jail because they could hear people moaning and groaning and things. But
Which I don't know if it's the best thing, because we do see a lot of those models still existing today, where a lot
yeah,
of juvenile
yeah,
justice centers are really right next to a police precinct or schools with alternative education.
it
And
is
you do
interesting.
see what lockup is right next to
Yeah,
you. And I don't know
yeah.
how much it dissuades young people from getting into issues. We know that community building does, like the Building Good community.
Right, right,
Mhm.
right. Well, the narrative on the website starts with them talking about they developed a Jenkins Orphanage Band with the students and with the children that they had in their care, and so the narrative on the website starts by talking about the inaugural parade of William Taft in 1909. The orphanage band was invited to play for the inaugural parade. And it talks about how they are clad in cast off uniforms from the Citadel, which, for those who don't know the history of Charleston, the Citadel was actually it's a university now, and one of the guests that are going to be in our recording is a professor there now, and that's where I actually got my master's when I was still living in Charleston. But the original Citadel was the first police barracks, and it was created by it was a place to organize the slave catchers, because once the enslaved folks were emancipated, now we needed to figure out how to control them. So they took the people that used to serve as slave catchers when enslavement was still legal before the Civil War and turned them into police. So that's the origins of the policing in the United States. And the Citadel was the first police precinct, if you will. So fast forward to 1909, and these young Black boys are playing in a band at an inauguration in DC with William Taft as the newly minted president, and they're wearing cast off uniforms from the Citadel, which was a place for slave catchers. So it's not lost on me that violence, just having them in those uniforms is violent. So
Mhm. And
anyway.
then the other thing is that I was thinking when they're talking about the narrative of them being in this inaugural parade, and Taft, who was not a person who was known to like children or known to want to deal with music and children. He was supposed to, I guess, be a
Apparently
very
not.
scared
Yeah.
type of person. But apparently, when he the motorcade rode by this group of young performers, he smiled, and that was like enough to make the news, for people to recognize that he smiled at this. And initially, having trauma of being raised Black in the United States was like, was this a menstrual thing? Like, at what time
Yeah.
was Taft there? And was he there like trying to like make fun of, how they were thinking about Black people in the United States? And then doing a deeper dive, recognizing that these young people were traveling up and down the coast. They were raising money to sustain their living conditions, that they were traveling to Harlem and to the Harlem Renaissance, going to the Cotton Club and Camilla's Inn and all of these other places. And so they were becoming a really well-known source of entertainment during that time, which is a wonderful way that we can think about what mutual aid looks like. This gentleman who decided that he was going to not let these young people be abandoned in a car, and then recognizing that he could fill a gap for all of the other young people that were without parentage, and then that they could fill a gap of bringing in joy in community through music and travel around and get their financial sustainability by sharing this gift, while the young people are also learning a skill that will develop them both musically, but then also intellectually, because we know how music
Right.
is very works intertwined with your development of your brain and all those type of things. So it's a really good example of some of the good parts about the stories in American history that we do not hear about coming out of the U.S. And it seems like you're eager to be.
Well, there were a couple of things that stood out to me when we were reading through the narrative on the website, and I encourage folks to go to the website. And again, we'll put that URL in the show notes so that you can find it and read the narrative. But one of the things that stood out to me was you were just saying that that this band was performing, and they were going up and down the East Coast and performing in cities, and they knew how, which is not surprising to me, but I just love it. They knew how to work the white crowd. And it talks about it in the narrative. They knew how there were specific sounds and songs that they wanted to incorporate because they knew the whites would like it, and the whites had the money. And so they would give the money. They made a conscious choice to have the band leader be the smallest human in the band, with too big of a hat, so it kind of swallowed his head, and he's out front, and he's waving the baton and seemingly conducting this band, because they knew that was going to be something that the white audience would find adorable and contribute money because of it. And I just loved I always love it when there's an example of somebody knowing white culture and whiteness so well that they're like, you know what, we're going to turn this shit around and we're going to work it to our advantage. And I know that happens all the time, but I don't know, the way it was placed in the narrative, I found was particularly pleasing to read.
It was. I'm also curious to because this is something that we were thinking about. I'm also curious about who's writing the narrative, because if it depicts the band leader, and I'm thinking about the tradition of historically Black colleges and universities and marching bands being such a major component of it. And they also have, I don't even know what he's called because I didn't go to an HBCU, though I wish I did. But the band leader, and he has the big hat, and he, and you also see it so I'm curious about the tradition of that, and also the young person dancing, knowing that in the 1920s and going to the cotton clubs, and the dancers and the way that they were moving and performing in such a way that these young people would have been modeling the traditions of some of the well-known entertainers of that day, in the way that they were presenting their marching band leaders. And then we'll be able to share kind of a clip of the music to hear how this big sound was that these young people were being able to produce. But it helps us to be thinking about how all of these cultural contexts make the United States a place of such fun, rich history that we lose when we are not thinking about how much each group of people contributes to the work. And then I brought this up because we're thinking about them utilizing or not protesting so much, having language associated with them. Because in one of the things that we were reading, they were called pickaninnies, which is a derogatory term in the United States. Here on the island, calling somebody's pick-me their pick-me is just their pick-me. That's just the word that we use, an African context, and pick-me is just the word that we use to talk about our kids, and it's a close relationship with them. So, but utilizing that in the United States, and then folks not having an issue with it in the United States because they were going to try to attract the white audience for, financial support, not negating that there, especially during the Harlem Renaissance time, that there was a robust Black dollar during that time, because you had, Madam C.J. Walker, you had all of the people who owned those clubs in Harlem that were Black identified folks when they first came out, before they got sold to the folks who took over the property later on. But the opportunity for young people to be in this position of entertainment and being able to travel all around and really catching the eye of folks because they had such a wonderful, amazing musical skill coming out of these little bodies who are also orphaned people just shows the power and the magic of what is possible when folks are working together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it says in the narrative at one point that they all played all of the instruments. All of the instruments that they were able, of course, they were instruments that were not brand new. They were cast offs, but they did the best they could with, and all of them learned how to play all of them, so that it didn't matter who may not be able to perform. They were always able to fulfill the full band. And yeah, it's another example of how this country, I mean, here we are, we're about to talk about the 250th anniversary in the midst of a time where our current administration and so many people attached to that are trying to erase the contributions of Black Americans, Black humans in the development of all of these things. And in the narrative of the orphanage, they talk about the band, they talk about the music that they played and how they would put their own spin on it, and where ragtime came from, and where, so much jazz. I mean, all of these things come from Black humans, right? And this band is just another example of just a beautiful thing that came out of a horrific experience, whereas these children were orphaned and had no one to care for them. And Reverend Dr. Daniel Jenkins decided that he was going to create a community out of it, and it's still there today.
It's sustainable. That's what I was so excited about. Like the fact that this is a history that started in the 1800s. We're in 2026. It's still going forward. It's still being able to celebrate like these conversations about what exists in the history of the United States, the narratives that we don't hear about, but that we get to celebrate. And so I'm excited about that. I know that we are coming on our time. I don't know if you want to exit out.
I know. I wanted to go out with listening. So as we were talking and we are going through this narrative on the website, and we're so excited about being able to record in this space. Jay, you started doing your searches and found on YouTube, all things can be found on YouTube, found a recording of the band. I'm not exactly sure if it says 1928. So just for context, they started the orphanage in 1891. They performed at Taft's inauguration in 1901. So this is 1928. So this is a little further down the road. And we will end on this. So for those of you who are listening, you can hear the sounds of this band performing. We don't know where they're performing. It doesn't say in the descriptor. But for those who are watching, you get to see their faces. And it's hard to watch because it's old but it's a wonderful thing. And we'll just close it out after that. So I'm excited about going to Charleston and recording this, and more will be revealed. And we will let you guys know, and maybe share some clips going on after we do the recording. So
join us for the joy celebration.
Enjoy. So thanks everybody.
All right. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Deanne. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.